Get my agenda. I'd like to call this meeting to order for the Blackhawk County Board of Supervisors for January 26, 2023. This is a meeting to discuss the county EMA levy and the 28E agreement. So roll call, please, Mr. Veeder.
Hall.
Here.
Little.
Here.
Schwartz.
Here.
Jonka.
Here.
Leyland.
Here. Thank you. Would everyone join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 1, agenda received as proposed or as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The agenda is received as proposed. Item 2 is the work session, and this will be a discussion regarding the EMA levy and 28E agreement, as said earlier. Just as an opening comment, I guess, somewhat to the board and any to the mayors on as well. It was 2 weeks ago, or close to 2 weeks ago, I think, at one of our first budget sessions, that I brought up to the board the proposed EMA levy and my concerns, which I know all of the mayors have heard in the November meeting and in the December meeting as well. So they were the same concerns I expressed at that time. And I thought there was a lot of questions that we needed to have answered before we went forward with it. And so that's kind of where my position was on it, but I didn't want it to be my position, so brought it back to the board as well on their concerns, and just us going forward with it. So last Thursday, we went to the EMA board, and I thought as we sat around there to share information, I had thought that would have been nice to have been a joint meeting. Probably would have been a good time to have had a joint meeting where all the board members could have heard questions and answers, but it's really kind of brought us to where we are today then. This is somewhat a similar work session for the same purposes, so that we can hear some of the work that needs to be done yet as we prepare for this. And we found out a lot more than we even knew a couple of weeks ago, but more to be considered. So we have different individuals from, I guess, our staff that will be presenting. And I was going to say, I think, Amanda, were you going to start today with maybe some lead off with a meeting with some of the HR concerns and the director? I mean, it's okay. That'd be great.
Okay. Amanda Fezemayer, Human Resources Director for Blackhawk County. Okay, so I had attended the EMA meeting last week as well as one previous to that. And some of the things that I had highlighted of the concerns with this is with regards to the 2080 agreement specifically, and some of the organizational structure, policy setting, and just really that kind of whole employer of record discussion that we had. So what I want to start with is first talking just about EMA from our perspective in HR right now. EMA is a separate entity. We currently have a employment contract on file for the director, Mindy Benson. The county currently supports HR functions for like payroll, benefits, accruals, and things like that. However, we aren't involved in like the hiring decision. We aren't involved in really disciplinary action. We aren't involved in kind of investigatory type things, like how we're involved in the other departments here at Blackhawk County. So with dispatch being considered being funded under the EMA levy, I started asking questions as to how that really works. One, most importantly, because we do have a collective bargaining union and a current agreement that covers the dispatchers as well as the sheriff's operations. And then, of course, keeping in mind that while EMA is technically a separate entity, Blackhawk County Board of Supervisors does not solely govern EMA. And by introducing dispatch, that would also mean that can we really have a union that's governed by two separate bodies? So in talking with Scott County HR Director, who also served over in Johnson County, and talking with our labor attorney out of Ehlers and Cooney, Mike Galloway, and talking with union reps from Teamsters as well and other communities, they've all said Blackhawk is not unique in this proposal, but what would be unique is if we don't thoroughly plan for this shift. It's very clear in all the 2080 agreements that we've collected from communities that have an EMA levy that the employees are employees of the dispatch center. So therefore, we would have to step through a process to essentially amend out the dispatchers from the current collective bargaining agreement, and also in a way that allows them time to collectively bargain under Chapter 20. I just want to talk about the definitions. For example, in Chapter 20, when I speak about governing body, under the definition it says governing body means the board, council, or commission, whether elected or appointed of a political subdivision of this state, including school districts and other special purpose districts, which determines the policies for the operation of the political subdivision. The 2080 agreement that we received and that has been in place clearly states that the policy and the operational needs are determined by this consolidated board, not the Board of Supervisors. So shouldn't that collective bargaining also follow along in suit that they be at the table with that board, not the Board of Supervisors? I have talked with Sheriff Thompson about this. I've talked with Judy Flores about this. I've talked with board members about this. I brought it up to the mayors. Understandably, this is not something that the mayors always have information about. Not everybody collectively bargains under Chapter 20, depending on the makeup of your city and the workforce that you have. But it is an area that we really need to focus on and understand and plan thoroughly because it has an impact on our workforce. The biggest one being that when we recognize them as a separate entity under EMA, as it is stands today, they lose that public safety bargaining right. And if you're not familiar with that, some of the changes in 2017 really distinguished certain areas that public employees can bargain, and there was a heavy shift for those that were non-public safety in the areas that are prohibited, the areas that are permissible, and then the mandatory requirements. But when I'm looking at this 2080, that's just one element that I feel that is important for us to discuss. And I want to be respectful to the employees over there. I want us to be very open about the possibility of really, looking at other communities, and that it's likely that this separation is going to occur just because, again, it's two different governing bodies over one union. I also believe that operationally, this would be in the best interest of the mayors and the Board of Supervisors to be able to set policy and collectively bargain specific to dispatchers and not have to take into account the jail operations. And then as well, I want to make sure that the employees feel like they've been given their full right to be able to collectively bargain and be recognized as a separate union. Doing this in July 1st, when under Iowa Code we're supposed to have collective bargaining agreements done by March 15th, makes that very challenging, if not impossible. And they would be possibly looking at having not a union going into the next fiscal year. So I would like to see, I guess, I know there's many other factors to consider, but if we can honor this current collective bargaining agreement, which ends next fiscal year, and that would allow them the time to be recognized, to file a petition with PERB, and then it would be the board that would be consisted of mayors, Board of Supervisors, whatever that makeup is, to then collectively bargain specific to the needs of the dispatch operations and center with the new funding mechanism in place. So those are my, there are other areas of the 2080. I've spoken about the personnel board. There's been questions about, and that is more of an exposure for the county, having a personnel board involving other police chiefs, fire chiefs to make hiring, firing, discipline decisions outside of what would typically be conducted with our office is an exposure there. I've also had a chance to look at this, there's just some language in here that really just doesn't honestly belong, that refers to like arbitration. I think it's just kind of dated language. And let me just catch here. When we spoke with Scott County, again, that HR director outlined that they have a really good partnership. They essentially run all of the HR functions through the county, but the dispatch center under EMA is recognized as a separate entity. And she also had experience in Johnson County where that was done a bit differently, where HR did not have any of that involvement, and basically the county said, well, we're not going to be responsible or be held liable for any of your decisions regarding employment relationships, therefore you will have your own payroll, you'll have your own HR, and that to me isn't an ideal situation, because again, if it truly falls back on the county, you might as well utilize the resources that we have. I just want to align that 2080 in a way that mirrors Scott County, because I think they've had extensive experience since they consolidated back in 2007 and then did their EMA levy in 2011 to really kind of hash out all of the elements that need to be figured out when it comes to the aspects of operating a dispatch center under a separate governing body. And I can help answer any questions, or I don't know the full extent yet of to how to step this through. When I spoke with our labor attorney, they said in some ways, if you just let it expire and hold off for fiscal year 25, it will kind of naturally separate, as opposed to doing it effective July 1st, and then we have to step through amending them out of that agreement. And then again, will they have time? They really will not have time to unionize and to have that right to bargain as a non-public safety union. So that would be somewhat my recommendation, and just kind of give you an overview of the concerns that I have. There are other areas that I haven't quite explored. Scott County does provide the group health coverage insurance. We can do that. We have a way to do that, to allow a taxing body to be on our health insurance plan. I don't foresee that being an issue to continue that. Scott County also, though, they said that they had a separate, they were separate when it came to work comp specifically. So the county was self-insured at Scott County. Work comp was separate for the center called SECC. I did have some questions as to how did that work when there was an employee injury then, because we are heavily involved with ADA, we're heavily involved with temporary alternate duties and FMLA. So how do those things cross over if they're kind of held separately? And that's the kind of things I'd like to determine before we entirely move away and separate them as a separate entity.
So you really don't have any information, or probably haven't been able to dig into it enough to know timelines, like how long some of this even has taken in other counties,
No, I mean,
other than we knew.
it's a little unique because like Scott County had consolidated, so they had to take that into consideration, before doing the EMA levy and before figuring out what county is going to pick up versus, what that separate entity is going to kind of be held responsible to. But, we've already consolidated. I don't think there's any changes to change the actual consolidation model, or we don't have to step through that. So I anticipate that utilizing this next year, again, mostly to allow those employees to just write out that contract, and in the meantime, we figure out the remainder of the activities that need to be fine-tuned. I haven't talked with payroll at all about this. I don't think it should be an issue because it's currently kind of done that way anyways, but I had questions about unemployment insurance, for example. So again, assuming that the county is going to pick up that, and that does all kind of affect, same with health insurance. I mean, those things do affect the greater pool for us. So I'd like to talk to Michelle more. One of the things they brought up at Scott County was cost allocation for IT, maintenance, HR is another example, and to get a full picture that really reflects what it takes to support the operations of dispatch outside of just the workforce specific to that area and that department, but also all the other things that go in to supporting that at the county level. So those are things that I would like to continue to explore, as well as collect, and then again, just being respectful to the employees and their current collective bargaining agreement that's in place until next fiscal year. So that we can kind of be ahead of this, communicate it in such a way that to ensure a smooth transition, it's not probably going to be. There's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, but again, we're seeing this natural separation amongst these two operations, and really it would benefit the sheriff's union, especially with that sworn officer percentage that they need to maintain to be a public safety union. They are currently riding pretty close to that 30% threshold. As we hire more civilians, that's going to further dilute that. When by splitting this off, you are going to strengthen that sheriff union a bit to avoid that possibly coming under where they are not public safety and having to go a year without a union. So all driven by the changes in Iowa Code Chapter 20 from a few years ago. So.
Any questions? I'm going to say, or maybe for later.
Yeah.
Sometimes do more questions, but I know that's.
Don't leave.
Don't.
Yeah.
There's questions and more questions. Any questions for those online? I was going to say Chris or Tom.
No, good job, Amanda, explaining it.
No, yeah, I appreciate it, Amanda.
I would like to maybe have the opportunity to outline, since I know there's this, it's an important thing to tell dispatch that they're no longer possibly going to be public safety and be able to bargain on that. I'd like the opportunity to kind of go through the current contract and really outline what that means. You know, we went through this with all of our other unions that are non-public safety, and the board took a very strong stance on honoring that we were going to bargain on all the permissible items and try to keep them intact as best we can. So that's one thing I would like I just haven't had time to do, but I'd like to go through and say, okay, this is what this really means for you all. And this is what, you know, again, at Scott County, that collective bargaining team is, I believe it's the board chair, Board of Supervisors chair, Davenport mayor, Bettendorf mayor, one mayor supporting or kind of representing the smaller communities, and then I think someone from Medic, and then the HR director. It's not our intention at all to strip any of this or to take advantage of this opportunity, but we have to recognize that they are still governed by a separate entity, and therefore we need to step through that process. But I do want to kind of go through and see, you know, what can they expect to see that change, because it may not be dramatic. For example, insurance. So they don't have the ability to bargain on insurance. However, right now the non-public safety has a slightly cheaper premium than the public safety for insurance. We didn't go through and strip that from the non-public safety. We want to have affordable benefits here. It's one of our strong suits. Obviously, IPERS is not a concern. This does not change IPERS. It doesn't change their public safety designation in IPERS. It's still coming out of a public agency and qualifies under IPERS, just like the other communities have done. But, you know, give the employees kind of a chance for maybe a Q&A. Maybe sit down with a union representative who's been through this with Marshall County and other communities and say, you know, what are your questions, what are your concerns, but allow that adequate time and really respect their collective bargaining agreement through what we intended, which is next year. So,
and just to ask the question, I guess, and I know nobody has that crystal ball, but when we've talked, I know at EMA meetings, and we've talked about the wanting to progress on the county EMA levy and going forward on that, and the possibility of doing it in 24 or in doing it in 25. That you're asking for more time to do this, do you think it's doable? Do you think it's 25 works for us? Is that enough time? Or is it too
I think that
difficult
would
to
be
say?
enough time. I would think, yeah. I don't think I need more than this year and a half. I think, you know, again, we do have things kind of set up in place. This isn't a total consolidation where we're having to, you know, rethink that. But I think the biggest thing is that collective bargaining piece, and that I want to make sure that we're handling sensitively, and that we're doing it in a way that the people at the decision table understand the importance of keeping those employee rights intact to the best that we can. So I would say, yeah, that should be sufficient, fiscal year '25, based on what I know today. So,
Yeah, as much as we can know today, thanks, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I was gonna say, Mike, were you thinking of going next, or if that would be all right with you, or whoever, I was gonna say?
I can go next.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about the governance issues, so.
Well, and a lot of this is going to be redundant at this point, but I want to make sure the board understands the advice I've given. I want to make sure that everybody else here understands why I've given it. And my advice isn't about taking a side. It isn't about whether a levy is done or not done. That's not my decision. That's not something I can influence. But what it is about is what the board's authorities are, what the commission's authorities are, and where the uncertainties are about those authorities. And finally, whether it's a good idea to do this 2080 agreement right now. So first of all, to be clear, the code does include communication services under chapter 29C as something that can be taken under the umbrella of the EMA, and that was a question a board member had raised to me earlier. Now, is the county required to fund the EMA? The short answer is yes, and that's never been in dispute here. The 29C.17 states that local emergency management agencies' approved budget shall be funded by one or any combination of the following options as determined by the commission. Shall imposes a duty, and it says as determined by the commission. However, the levy is only one of those options, and one of those options lists, the levy says it has to pass according to 331.424. 331.424 says that the board may certify a levy. According to the same statutory construction statute, i.e. 4.1.30 of the Code of Iowa, that says that shall imposes a duty, it also says that may confers a power. Board doesn't have any power if it has to vote yes. Having said that, there's at least one attorney, there's an attorney general opinion and at least one district court judge who have weighed in on this. The attorney general's opinion said that the county does not have the right or the power to veto a decision of the Emergency Management Commission. Mahaska County District Judge found that the county had no discretion whether to accept or not the funding methods chosen by the Emergency Management Commission. That is, however, in contradiction with the language of 331.424. It's unclear. It isn't clear what the Supreme Court would do if it were appealed at this point. I understand that there is legislation intended to clear this up that is or is going to be pending. Does an EMA levy require approval by the Board of Supervisors? Yes, it does. In order for that levy to take effect, the Board of Supervisors must approve it because 29C.17 says that the levy would be passed pursuant to 331.424 sub 1. Can the Board of Supervisors vote no on it? I've already spoken to this issue. I don't see anything prohibiting that, but then again, we have this conflict with the district court judge in Mahaska County and with the assistant attorney general's opinion. However, on the question of should the county vote to approve the proposed 2080 agreement sent this month, my advice at this point is no. And the reason is fairly basic. Number one, the proposed 2080 agreement is the heart and soul of how consolidated communication will be run, budgeted, and paid for going forward. This draft agreement, however, being the heart and soul of that, has not been the subject of one negotiation or discussion so far as I can see. I understand that there's been considerable talk about how this has come up for 6-7 years with the Emergency Management Commission. I further understand that there have been opportunities for supervisors to participate in these discussions or in these meetings where they haven't taken advantage. However, I also understand that 2 supervisors were fairly consistently attending these meetings, and that neither one of them heard a proposal for any type of an agreement or structure or framework, whatever you want to call it, as to how this levy would work. The initial piece of that, and I was here for an oversight board meeting in mid-December, and at that meeting there was a question: did the amended 28E did everybody get that? Nobody had gotten it yet. And so at some point shortly after that, it was emailed out to a number of people, but then an amended version of that came out again in January. It's not clear yet where the draft originated, what played into that draft. My understanding is that, and this was from Sheriff Thompson in part, was that the draft was an amended version of what we already had in place, but there's problems with that. For example, the EMA Commission and the EMC and the EMA, but in particular the EMA, is a separate standalone municipality. It's separate from every city within the county. It's separate from the county itself. And yet this agreement makes the employees county employees. Amanda spoke to the fact that that's not tenable, but then when you see how that kind of unravels, you realize it's not as simple as just changing who those employees work for. All of a sudden, the employees' rights come into play. Different financial aspects come into play. These are things that have to be hashed through before we can enter into an agreement. And this agreement that we have now, again, was received this month with 0 discussion. I can never advise that somebody vote to ratify an agreement under such a short time frame of consideration. Moreover, the proposed 2080 agreement would effectively render the county powerless concerning the levy, and that's despite the fact that the county is the taxing body under this levy right now, as the law currently sits. The draft gives outsized levy power to police chiefs, fire chiefs, who make up the center board, as well as the mayors who make up most of the Emergency Management Commission. The county only gets 1 supervisor against roughly 10 mayors, and that supervisor doesn't even sit on the center board. Now, Scott County, by contrast, which I understand to be the model of what the Emergency Management Commission is trying to do here, has an additional smaller board of directors to determine budget and levy. That board has only 5 members on it, and it gives people their authority according to roughly how much skin they have in this game. This should not be. It just seems, it's important the board understands that as it currently stands, the Emergency Management Commission, being mostly comprised of mayors plus 1 supervisor and Sheriff Thompson, they would be able to decide on this every single time. And if we accept the interpretation of the Attorney General, and it appears that seems to be the thrust of how the law is interpreted, well, then the Board of Supervisors would have to approve that. Now, the proposed 2080 agreement, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, has at least one provision I consider untenable or illegal, if you will, and that is where it makes all EMA employees county employees. Again, that can't be done because the EMA is a standalone municipality. You've already heard Amanda talk about the fact that a lot of employee rights and their understood privileges will be they'll be destabilized, at least in the initial stages of trying to put this into effect. Now remember something else Amanda said. Other counties have said we're not unique, we're not unusual for wanting to have an EMA levy and put this in place. However, we would be unusual if we didn't fully consider all of the impacts or effects of that levy. I know for a fact that there are department heads, or at least one who's come to me and wondered what effect is that going to have on the rest of the county budget if all of a sudden we have to levy for substantially more taxes. I think that's something the Board of Supervisors should weigh as well. So as a general rule of legal advice, if you're being rushed into an agreement without any opportunity to negotiate it and play out all the issues that could come, or at least as many as you can think of through implementation, and so far there's been zero negotiation, and we're in the middle of budget session for fiscal 24, that's a red flag that suggests you shouldn't sign on. Now in this instance, this is the busiest time of year with budget sessions. Other counties have done this differently. Scott was very clear that they spent years. Now I realize they had some infrastructure to change under their agreement, but even after it passed, I believe it was arrived at in December of 07, it wasn't until fiscal 11 that it took effect. Asking for a 1 year opportunity to work out the kinks and get this right is conservative compared to what other counties have done to get theirs right. Now, is the EMC permitted to levy above its budget? This is another area where the law is less than clear. However, my conclusion is no. While I continue to research this issue, and while there is the fact that special levies are not limited by statute, Section 331.424 provides that the board may certify special levies in, and I'm quoting now, in an amount sufficient to pay the charges. And for, among other things, the EMA, the Emergency Management Agency. It does not say or suggest that the board may levy in an amount known to be greater than an amount sufficient to pay the charges for that fiscal year. Now, it's my opinion as a result of that the commission and the county may not levy for an amount above the approved line item budget of the Emergency Management Agency. And therefore, when I hear talk about 150% or 125%, that, as I understand it, was just tacked on to a levy that anticipated what we were going to need to pay for the next fiscal year. I don't think that's legal. Moreover, the discussion at the Emergency Management Commission meeting I most recently attended was that, well, this will enable us to not have to raise taxes in future years, or at least not as soon as we would otherwise anticipated. One of the mayors in attendance suggested that, yeah, we take the hit up front, but then we don't have to worry about it for a while. Well, that obviously is levying for amounts that are not budgeted. I don't think that's legal. What happened over in Evansdale with regard to their fiscal 2019 budget and the decision on appeal suggests that my interpretation is correct on this. Are there concerns that haven't yet been considered? I'm sure there are, because this has only just come up within the last month or a little over a month. There's nothing to suggest that we had the works of a 28E agreement in effect at the time of the November Emergency Management Commission meeting. So I'm here as part of a collaborative effort to answer whatever questions I can or take them back and research them as to how to properly construct the framework of this levy, if in fact that's the direction things are going to go in. But as it sits right now, there are problems, especially from a Black Hawk County perspective, with the draft 2080 that was sent on January 6th. If anybody has any questions for me now, I'll do my best to answer them. And I might be wrong.
Yeah, research them. Primarily, it's the board's questions, he says.
Hot board today, huh?
I was gonna say, yeah.
I'll answer them from mayors or anybody else here as well as best I can. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, Mike, that's what I was just going to say. Because I find I'm going to have a hard time moving forward this year against both legal advice and our HR director, both of you who I highly respect and have valued all of your sound advice over the years. And so I would ask that if there are mayors that have information to the contrary, like this is the time to bring this all up, and so that we all hash it out together.
Oh, definitely, I agree with you, Chris. I was just kind of giving the supervisors the lead questions or lead comments. If you had any, otherwise, yes, we can open it up to anyone in the audience.
Madam Chair, I've got a presentation to address all this, but let's let Michelle go ahead and do her presentation, and then we can kind of bring you back to that 50,000 foot view, and I can address it all.
Well,
I don't necessarily have a presentation. I did make some comments at the EMA meeting last Thursday, and I think Mike has expressed some of the concerns that I brought up. The original budget that we worked on for Consolidated Communications, I believe that total was just over $2.7 million. And that was relatively in line with prior years. Some pay increases, some bills that go up, that sort of thing. And we did add one new position to that budget. Since that time, there has been discussion about setting a levy at 125% of that budget or 150% of that budget without necessarily, I guess, fleshing out the details of how those funds would be used. And there were also concerns expressed by some of the mayors at the last EMA meeting that they would have a difficult time or didn't want to, possibly, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but that it would be difficult for them to add 125% to their budget instead of doing the 100% that they've been used to doing over the past several years. And so I think those are the issues I wanted to bring to the board's attention last week. This is a separate levy, so it doesn't fall under our general levy limit. It does have a separate line item, but it would add, in whatever version is adopted, it definitely will add, depending on what's adopted, somewhere between $2.7 and $5 million to the county budget.
And 2.7 would be 100% of where it was funded last fiscal year.
Plus one new position and other more typical expense increases. And the county's, right, and the county's share of that was probably about $245,000, I think, last year.
I'd have to look. So 2.
Madam Chair, this is Mayor Green.
Yes, Mayor Green, go ahead.
So earlier it said about mayors not wanting to put forward this to our councils. I just want to be clear, especially for Cedar Falls, looking at these numbers, it was said earlier also 100%, that would continue the 100% from previous years. Well, for Cedar Falls, switching to this new approach that we're already looking to have to pay for at the new 100%, it's an 18% increase over what we paid last year. And the 125% isn't the 680, it's about 890,000 that Cedar Falls is going to have to pay into it. And I don't see that with the 125% having to tack on an additional $200,000. My council's just not going to go for it. So I'm not comfortable asking them or putting them on the spot for the 125% for an approval or for that. And I don't see how I'm going to be able to vote for that when we have the EMA meeting. I'll have 7 council members to have to try to get through on that because they're the ones who are going to have to pay for it.
Certainly. Yes, thanks for clarifying your comments from last week, I guess it was. I think that was at the same time that we all kind of looked at each other and thought the same thing of it's not all right for the cities to do the 125%. It's very difficult for the county to think of doing 125%, especially at this early stage where we haven't had some of these discussions and comments and talked through some of this. So thank you very much. Anyone else that would like to
Can I
comment?
tack on one more point?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry for
This is kind of a
interrupting.
work session.
The 28E, because this levy would exist to fund communications and dispatch under the EMA. So 28E and how it's set up is really the heart and soul of how this is going to work going forward, how much authority the county is going to have, what size of seat at that table it's going to have. And so, in my opinion, that part has to be worked out before you get to the levy. Because if you pass the levy now, you're I mean, if you approve the 28E now, and then the levy passes to pay for it, that's probably going to nullify what bargaining power you have right now on this issue, and that's important to keep in mind.
Well, it seems important to me that the people are involved in this 2080 agreement from a governing standpoint or from whatever, that are the tax-paying and the ones that are responsible for the financial, I guess, responsibilities for our cities, for our county, that those should be elected officials. I don't know what others' thoughts are on it. I would think. That's where I think all the mayors, and correct me if I'm wrong, should have received that attachment that was prepared in the auditor's office and then sent out. And I thank you, Grant, for doing that as well, and Tim for preparing it. So they have had a chance to look at those 5 or 6 other counties that we were just looking at, and the spreadsheet made it much easier to see that most of those, I was going to say there was one board that was like 17 people on it, but most of those had this governing board or a finance board or whatever that was responsible for those decisions, and it then had advisory committees or advisory boards different components of it, but that was not the structure of the 2080 that we received. Which was, my earlier questions were just regarding that we weren't working as a partnership yet, and this was the time to start doing that. I guess I thought as we move forward, and whether it was, I know the Mayor Hart said too last week to start hammering out some of this stuff, and I thought this is where we all get together and hammer these things out, I guess, and so I'd like to do whatever we can to accommodate that and move this forward, but we haven't done that yet. Anyone else in the room or on Zoom? Other comments, questions?
I'd just like to say that I kind of concur with Chris on what he said. The counties, we have looked as a board towards our HR director, our legal county attorney's office, and I think there's some good sound advice there that we need to slow up on this, and if at least take a year, if not more, to work through all this stuff. So again, I agree with what Chris was saying earlier.
Well, it is nice to have the other agreements, I guess, for us to use and look at for templates, whether or not that's something we all agree to, that we like when we look at them or not, I guess. But that helps us, I think, kind of jumpstart our efforts. Doesn't mean there aren't a lot of considerations that maybe we have that they didn't have, I don't know, but it's good, as you said, you follow up with them and have talked with them, that they were a good resource, I think, too, or how it worked or what happened, but that's all, like I said, I think we're asking is just for the time to do this right.
Sounds like Scott County, their 28E agreement is a very good template.
Okay, you haven't probably looked
I
at
would
it yet,
agree.
I was gonna
I would
say.
agree.
Oh.
Seems to be a balance given the fact that we are the taxing body. That structure, that board of directors structure would make some sense. I don't know. I'd like to hear the rest of the presentations and conversations, and I know Tony said Tony said he had some thoughts and had a presentation he wanted to share.
I do.
Well, I guess that's up to the board.
And did you
Board's
want to
choice.
hear
Oh,
from, I know Mike Hendrickson's here as well, if you wanted to hear from him.
We want to hear from everyone, so thank you. I was
Yes.
going to say, from all people in attendance, that's what the work session's about. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Board. Mike Hendrickson, Director of Blackhawk County Conservation. And my comments are going to be brief, and maybe they would have been a little more educated if Tony would have got up here first, but that's okay. I do feel like I kind of come into this late, but due to the fact that it does sound like this has just kind of dropped out of the sky, and it happens to have dropped out of the sky, at least from my standpoint, right during budget time, which is very concerning for us, and it's very concerning for the autonomous board that I represent, one of the 3 autonomous boards that we have in the county. And so, again, I guess just the general statement is I really don't understand how moving forward with this right now will do anything but affect every department in Blackhawk County in a very negative fashion or form. And it's kind of, I stood here on Tuesday to do my presentation for Conservation's FY24 budget. And, we were talking about an FTE in there. And those things are very hard to come by. And I explained the need for it. And the need, ironically, is because we are taking care of and presenting environmental education from our nature center to all these cities that are in this room today. And we feel like we're almost being overwhelmed because of the ask and the need from the school districts in these communities. And that's why I was here asking for that. So I sit here and I see what may happen, in FY24, and I'm going, I don't see where I have any hope, to retain that FTE or to get that FTE. And so my concerns could go on, but it's really from a budgetary standpoint at this point. And I am very interested to hear more of what's to say. But I think, I guess common sense would say that if we can take some time and figure this out, as opposed to dropping kind of the bomb, so to speak, immediately, it just makes a lot of sense. And it certainly makes a lot of sense for county conservation, and I think it makes sense for every department in Blackhawk County. So I'm certainly asking that I just think time can make this landing a lot easier, and that's all I'm asking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, I'd just like to share with you that, as we weigh this decision, that doesn't necessarily impact my belief of the level of services that the county deserves, right? And so,
Sure.
Frankly, I was elected to ensure quality services.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I take you at your word of what you need. I take all of our departments at their word of what they need. We've got a lot of stuff to balance, a lot of priorities to balance, but we also recognizing this is unique. Just want to reassure you, at least from my perspective, we have a responsibility to make sure this county is top notch, and listening to our department heads is a part of that equation for sure. So
Yep.
just want to share that with you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mike.
Just
Yes.
really quickly, I'll have comments later, but I'm confused. His presentation versus what we're talking about, consolidated dispatch, and the fact that someone calls in to 911 having an expectation. Does this have an impact? Because I'm confused. And is this a department head that wants an additional staff member, or does this have an impact on his department? So I'm confused right now because I don't want to take away from what he's doing. So what is,
No.
or you've got department heads here to talk about they want to, they would like to have a position too, and we're talking about something completely different.
Well, I
So-
think that we're trying to figure out how to have this conversation about this levy in the entirety of our budget, right?
Yeah.
Not to speak for anybody, but I think that's what this conversation is it's not. Frankly, part of the issue here is that this isn't just a singular issue. This is a complex house of cards, and we've got to try to make it work. We want to. It's not a matter of, at least from my perspective. Frankly, I ran because I was tired of asking why would we help, and I wanted to figure out how can we help. But we have to have that holistic conversation. So, yeah, if it meant some reassurance from some folks up here for department heads, I think it's fine. I think we can still move forward on this discussion. The majority of this discussion is about the dollars, the 2080 agreement. We're here to just try to work through it.
Well, and I'm not sure of your question. Is it that this isn't all part of, I guess, our discussion? Because it does impact, I say, the levy, what we do in our budget. I think that was how this came up initially, was just to say something that is going to impact our levy will be this discussion on EMA.
Right.
What it does and how it might impact the departments and their asks and their requests, it's all still
And is this the
moving
first
parts.
time that FTE was asked in that department?
No, he
Okay.
did his presentation yesterday. and
But,
he
I mean,
was-
over the years, though,
Oh,
is this the
probably.
first time this has ever been asked for?
that's-
Or is this
oh,
someone
go
that
ahead,
has been
Phil.
asking for a position for a long time?
No.
And then now?
No, this is a
Brand
change.
new?
This is a change, brand new.
All right,
This
thank you.
education component, no, thank you.
Just as a department head, and I appreciate Mike coming up here because it takes a lot of courage. And so one thing I'm, from another perspective of a department head, we just spent 2 days with consultants going over a countywide classification and compensation study where they met with majority of our staff here and were telling them the county has invested in understanding where we fit in the market because we have had such high turnover this last several years. But they've also circled back and say, one of the things we have to take into account is not everybody's going to get a pay increase. We're not here to cut pay, but we're here to evaluate it, and we're here to understand where a recommendation needs to fall. And specific for that's a huge initiative that our office was able to get forward with board support, and it has long-lasting impacts. And one of the things that even the consultant said is we have to balance the fiscal capacity that the county has to be able to implement a recommendation if we are 15% below market, 10% below market, or if we fall right in with market. So I think what Mike's trying to draw on and what I can relate to is that when we hear something that is coming down the pipeline of upwards of possibly $2.5 to $5 million that we haven't had to, that our board hasn't had to necessarily fund to that extent, we start thinking about, well, where is everything going to land for us? And I appreciate that the support that, we want to be supportive of services, but that is a bit of the reality is that, is there going to be something that falls? And I'm concerned about employees hearing after 2 days of orientation sessions around that we're going to look at your wages, we're going to, we aren't promising anything, but it's possible this could somewhat hinder us in our ability, to be more competitive possibly in the external market. So I think that's not a new FTE, that's just kind of an initiative that we waited a very long time to implement something, a study like this, and we've had a lot of staff here who have gone through this process where we always run out of money, and so, or not always run out of money, but that tends to be kind of the narrative at times, and so it is a bit concerning as department heads, in addition to the other areas of the 2080 as just that uncertainty and maybe having that opportunity within this year to kind of allow our board and to kind of look at the bigger picture of the county as to, because we always have to prioritize certain projects, but this one kind of feels like it just came out of left field when it comes to like a department head's perspective. So that's, if that's helpful, so.
So part of our situation and our challenge today is not just that consolidated dispatch being levied on the county levy, it is because staff has concerns about whether or not pay increases will happen in their particular departments, because for years,
No.
they may have not.
That's-
Okay.
No, that's not.
That's kind of what I heard.
Okay, well, I'm sorry.
Linda, the only thing I'd say in regards to what Tavis said, we're in the middle of our budget process. And over the years, there's no supervisor who wants to cut services or do anything. But at this stage, we don't have any idea whatsoever on what effect our departments, what the board's going to do as far as maintaining the current level, increasing or whatever. So I think what Mike was saying, that they have concerns that there may be a limit that the board will go in taxing. But at this stage, we don't have any idea on our current departmental budgets. We're just doing the review right now. We haven't gotten down to making any decisions. So nobody really knows where we're going to end up at this stage.
Yep, and I'll go ahead and reiterate that I do know where my principles lie. And so you might have your position, Tom, and I respect that. I've got mine, and I hope you can respect that as well.
But unfortunately, principles are one thing, and what we can afford and tax for is another thing. So they go hand in hand. The bottom line is we have to look at what we can actually put out there to the taxpayers.
Is there anyone else on Zoom or in the audience that would like to comment, or is anything else to add? I was going to say, even from a staff's perspective, or someone.
Yeah, I was going to ask if maybe Michelle could just speak to this a little bit, or someone else, of what, if we went forward with this right now, what does this do to our county levy as it stands? And when taxpayers get that bill, is this going to be? But just clarify: is this it included in this? Is this billed out separately? How are they going to see that this transfer has been made of this taxing responsibility?
Some of that hasn't been determined yet. So it technically is considered part of the county's supplemental levy. So historically on the tax bill, that would just come in the county line on your tax bill. And that range is probably somewhere between 46 and 75 cents that would be added to the county levy to do that, depending, again, on what level of budget's approved, and I just don't know that. There have been a number of options thrown out. I'm not aware of any particular one of them being approved yet. There are some challenges, and Tim Jamison maybe with the real estate office can express them better than I can, about how, whether we can separate that out, that levy, to show that it's separate from the county. But I don't know that those technical things have been sorted out at this time.
Can Tim explain that? Because it's my understanding it can be separated out. It could be shown as a separate line item on your bill when you get it.
I thought it had to be.
Tim Jamison, real estate tax manager. I'm responsible for entering the tax rates into our real estate tax system. When this first came up, I pulled out my list of available levies for the county budget because I didn't recall seeing an EMA levy as one of those. Indeed, there is no such thing as an EMA levy. It's part of the county's general basic or general supplemental levies. So we wouldn't necessarily be entering a new tax rate for EMA levy. It would be part of the county's general fund levy, and when you got your tax bill, it would show 10, 20, whatever % increase in your county taxes. Number of years ago, Blackhawk County agreed to pay for all of the new radio towers that were installed. We did that with our debt service levy. There was a concern that among the board members that they didn't want to make it look like the county was responsible for such a large tax increase. I wasn't here then, but I know our treasurer worked long and hard under our old real estate software to make that appear as a separate item on the tax bills, not without a lot of heartburn. So when this came up, I began trying to find out whether or not we could do it with our new real estate software. I checked with the 7 other counties who use the EMA levy. 6 of those, well, 5.5, basically put all of that under their county levy. So it would just show like an increase in the county's tax collection. The exception to that was Johnson County. Johnson County does break out a separate line on their tax bill. So and they use the same software we do. I spoke with my counterpart down there who does that. She said she'd be happy to send me screenshots and information about how they manage to do it. Kind of what you do is make a fake taxing authority that doesn't really exist. It's in their case, the Johnson County Emergency Communications Center. They don't really have that as a taxing authority, but they put it in their system as such, and so it shows up on their bills. It's a lot of extra work. I'm happy to do it if directed. But I was also told at Johnson County that because it's a lot of extra work, they're talking about trying to get rid of that going forward. So
Because of the extra
long explanation, Dan, but or sorry, Supervisor Trelko, but yes, it can be done.
I'm trying to think of where we are in our budget process too, to even have this information, like I say, to start looking at those types of things, where we are in our budget. We're still got budgets to go through. It's not like we're not looking at the collective numbers yet, which would give us some more information, but more time would be needed. Anyone else with a question or comments? Yeah, no? Michelle, is there anything, I was trying to think too, were there any comments made regarding finances at the EMA meeting, just that wouldn't have been shared with the board that needed to be?
I don't
Think we did.
recall any,
Okay, I
but
just-
my memory might be bad, but.
Okay, no, I just was thinking, just so that everybody had the same information. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Everybody take a big cleansing breath for just a minute.
Oh, I think so, yeah. Deep breath.
I'm going to try and bring you out of the fog because I think there's been a lot of,
Thank you.
not necessarily misinformation, but just cloudiness given to a lot of what we've got going on here. And so my goal is to kind of give you a breakdown of what is and what isn't happening, and what has and what hasn't happened. So what I used as kind of a baseline to address concerns was the letter that came out midnight January 12th from the board. And we kind of broke it down into the 4 bullets that you see here. The 24 budget process, the 2080 concerns, the county obligations, expectations, and then staffing and other issues that have come up. Some additional issues, and I'll talk about some of the issues that came out yet today as we get to some of those slides. But I've tried to put this in a way that is digestible. I tried to share slides with you. I know that some of the lettering on those are very, very small, but you'll be able to see them on the screen as well. And Tom and Chris and Mayor Green and some of you all, you can see this screen share, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So again, the letter to the mayors from January 12th breaks down. There's multiple bullet points of concern. And so we tried to address those bullet points of concern as to what truly has happened, what hasn't happened, what is assumption, what is fact, and really where we sit today. You should have in front of you now a few different documents. You should have the original 1995 2080. So you can see the baseline foundational document that was originally filed with the Secretary of State from the founding fathers, if you will, of the Consolidated Communications Center. That is the baseline document that everything has been built off of. Then you should also have, from Judy, a 28E agreements timeline. That has every change that has occurred to that baseline timeline since its original filing back in 1995. So again, when Attorney Trinan it says this indicates that all of a sudden the county is going to be employing dispatchers and those sorts of things. They always have. Nothing has changed, and you'll be able to see on that timeline how nothing has changed. It kind of walks you through since the baseline occurred in 1995 when all of those powers that be got together, how all those documents came together, and you can kind of digest that as we go through. So I'm going to, as briefly as possible, as fully and transparently as possible, I'm going to try and walk you through some of these concerns and explain them as we can. So December 20, not January, not last week, not 3 weeks ago, but December 20 is when the mayors, the Consolidated Communications Board, the supervisors, that's when everybody got the FY24 consolidated budget. That's when they got the 125%, and that's when they got the 150% projection. That's also when they got the 5-year plan from the Personnel Committee. And I know that it went through both the EMA channels and it went through the Consolidated Communication Board channels because I'm the board chair for both. And Mindy and Judy sent it to both of their respective email chains. So since December 20th is when everybody's had the latest and greatest of all of that. So there's been an assertion that budget planning and you know that there was this absence of information and this was again given to you all prior to the beginning of budget. And we recognized, and I stood right here during the last oversight committee, I looked Linda in the face and I said, I pledge to you, you will have it by January 1st. And I got it to you 4 days before Christmas because I wanted to get it off my plate before I left for a week. So we made sure that everybody had it by December 20th. So any assertion that you didn't have it, you know, prior to the 12th or whatever, that's just not true.
Well, maybe that was the 2080 agreement, the final.
And that could
January.
be. So again, I'm not responsible for the 2080 agreement. That's lawyer stuff.
No, but I just meant everything that's been.
But the 2080 agreement, and that's the other thing. Let's not get too bound down in the weeds between EMA levy and 2080 agreement. We're talking about two completely separate things. One is not dependent on the other. They relate to each other, and they are interrelated. But funding the center and the 28E reflects the funding process. But the EMA levy is not dependent on the 28E. In fact, one of the first questions, and I think it was Cedar Falls finance director asked, well, what if we don't like the levy? We'll just not sign the 28E. And I said, well, the 28E doesn't pertain to the levy. The 28E pertains to the consolidation efforts of the communications center, not the levy. The levy is the EMA commission. The levy is the decision of that commission, and it doesn't reflect anything. The 28E has to do with the Consolidated Communication Board. So I often have heard, and have heard yet today, this intertwining of don't sign the 28E. Got it. Your attorney doesn't like the way the 28E agreement is written. I understand. I didn't write it. I had no authority back 30 years ago when it was, and I was a young deputy. That wasn't me. The foundational document that you now have in front of you, you can see where it started, and now you can see all the changes to it over time. You can see how we got to where we are today. So I'm not pledging that, hey, this is the latest and greatest document ever. But the 28E has very minimal relation to the EMA levy and the board or the commission action that was taken by EMA to say we want to take over funding Consolidated Communications. Now, it does reflect, the 2080 does reflect, and that's why it came in front of you, because we got rid of oversight. We put EMA in there as that oversight body. But the last thing as I kind of introduce how we get into this presentation is how we got here and why we are here. For 8 years, probably longer, but for at least 8 years, what is this group known as the Oversight Committee has argued, fought, cajoled, discussed, frustrated over how to fund the Consolidated Communications Center for at least 8 years. And for at least that amount of time, there has been earnest conversation about how to find and secure stabilized funding for the long term for the Consolidated Communications Center. Last year, that oversight board, that oversight committee, that oversight group of mayors and board of supervisors elected to hire a company. That company is called DeltaWorks, and that DeltaWorks company was hired to conduct a survey and a study of the efficiencies of that center, of the good, the bad, and the ugly of that center. The reason we are here today, not next year, not 10 months ago, but the reason we are here today is the product of the work of DeltaWorks. For no other reason. We would have continued to talk and argue and fight about how to fund the dispatch center if not for that work study. I have no doubt in my mind that that is true. Pursuant to you all asking for that work study, for that insightful look at the good and the bad and the ugly of the Consolidated Communication Dispatch Center, DeltaWorks came back and said, you're not doing enough. You're not paying enough, you're not staffing enough, and you've got a problem with safety. So essentially they put you on notice, right?
Well, it depends on the safety version of what that safety was. That was one of the questions I believe I asked. It wasn't that we're not taking care of people with 911 calls, correct?
Do you want me to read out of the 64-page document?
I have
They
that.
specifically
I have
talk about safety.
And safety as it is, I think, to employees who were overworking, overburdened, and
Both
some of the
safety
issues that
and
could be.
my staff out on the road.
So there's
They
things
allude
like
to
that
both.
That are safe, yes, but I was going to say, but our
Yeah, they allude to
911
both.
dispatch is answering calls, correct?
This is dangerous. What we are doing is dangerous, and they made it very clear.
Well, I want to be certain that we're not endangering people now, was what I.
We are.
So we are, yes.
We are. Any doubt? Any doubt in anybody's mind that sat in on the DeltaWorks presentation as to the result that we are, the way we are funding, the way we are staffing, the way we are producing work at the dispatch center right now was unsafe?
That's unfair.
That was very clear, the message. That was very clear, the message.
But I'm saying, we are addressing that, like 911 calls are answered now. That's not something we've been hearing. I know at EMA, we've not heard that. So I'm just asking the question. We are still meeting those
Work is
needs.
being done, absolutely.
Yes.
Work is
well,
being
not
done.
just work being done, but we're not letting calls go. Those calls are
No,
being
correct.
addressed. Okay, that's
Correct.
all I just meant.
I'm not putting word in anybody's mouth.
No.
I'll share the findings with anybody that wants to read it.
I
These are their words. So, again, when DeltaWorks, the company that you all contracted to do that survey, to do that work study, says you're understaffing, you're underfunding, and you've got a problem with the ultimate liability associated with the safe and effective functioning of your center, that's why we're here today. So immediately upon receiving that 64-page document from DeltaWorks, I directed the dispatch staff, our board directed our personnel committee to start putting together that 5-year plan of how do we start implementing and integrating their recommendations into something that is functional, into something that we can, I guess I'll use the word palatable, something that is palatable, into something that we can make work, because nobody, no administrator in the room likes to be put on notice and say, we're putting people's safety at risk. So last Thursday, one of the things that was brought up was, well, even the 5-year plan doesn't make a lot of sense because you're not hiring you're not hiring dispatchers right away. You're not hiring. We're taking another. I'll use another P word, and that's pragmatic. We're taking a pragmatic approach, palatable and pragmatic. We picked low-hanging fruit right off the bat in the personnel committee. We took staff in and we said, listen, how can we workload level? How can we take that staff and have the biggest impact right off the bat? And how can we maximize the value of the dollar with the staffing levels, minimal change? We knew that we were going to be working on union issues. We knew that we were going to be working on HR issues. We knew that we were going to be working on other issues. So everything that's been said, everything that HR said, we don't disagree with. But it's not something, again, that from a funding perspective, we didn't already anticipate having to do something different. But when you commission a study that says you've got a problem, we don't say, okay, we've got a problem, but we're going to wait 2-3 years, a year and a half to do something about it. We're going to initiate movement on addressing the problem. And the rest of it, we'll work out the details as we move along. And so we'll take that pragmatic and that transparent approach, and we'll hire somebody that can start load leveling. We'll hire that clerical position that can start doing warrant entries, that takes that workload off of a dispatcher, that frees up that dispatcher work time to allow them to start doing other things. Because we know we have to hire dispatchers before we can hire supervisors. We know that we have to build workspace before we can hire supervisors to give them someplace to sit. We have to build offices. We have to retrofit locker rooms. We have other things that 125% speaks to that isn't spelled out in 125% budgeting, but we know we have that expense associated with it, but we don't have contracts. We don't have people sitting there ready to do construction work, but we know we've got those expenses associated with these staffing changes, with these models that these recommendations that DeltaWorks has made. So all of that has been built into those projections to allow for all of us to start building what DeltaWorks laid out as our recommendations to address these concerns that they see as damning, as problematic. So when it comes to the 2080, in front of you now, you see the timeline. In front of you now, you see the changes that have occurred. In front of you now, you see that nothing has changed in the paragraphs with regard to these people that all of a sudden now become burdensome because HR has to do this, that, or the other. They've always had that. They've always been that. Now, to that point, I do think, and our board, the Consolidated Communications Board, I think would agree that there's probably opportunity here to have HR more involved. I think there's probably opportunity here, and much like we do with maintenance services, there's probably opportunity for the Consolidated Board to be billed for services for HR. There's nothing different happening here than happens with the Health Department, County Conservation, Veterans Affairs, the Assessor's Office, or anybody else that has a Board of Governance.
No.
Yeah, that's just not true, respectfully.
I didn't interrupt you while you were
I
presenting.
understand, but I'm not going to, that's not
Um,
true to compare to health department. I work very closely with Nafisa, I work very closely with Mike Henderson.
The opportunity to bring you deeper into the fold, our board would be very interested in having that conversation. The opportunity to compensate the county for those hours worked on behalf of the Consolidated Communications Board. That makes sense too. And the opportunity to rework the positioning of whether it's a new union, whether it is the personnel layout, whatever. The challenge that we see and the challenge that the Consolidated Communications Board saw, and I do believe, and I'll let the mayor speak to this as part of the Emergency Management Commission, but I think the impetus for much of this is that once this document, the 64-page document was presented by Delta Works, by their consultant, it was clear that this wasn't something that we can simply sit back on and say, we'll take it under advisement.
Well, I do have a question, though, that you brought up, Tony. I was going to say, you mentioned that this continues as county employees is what we use now, and that would continue. But not that they couldn't be county employees and kind of hired or whatever. I don't know what that process would be. Rehired is what I'm thinking. But I was just, but as I understand it, it is to be a separate entity. So they were not to be county or city employees.
There's models out there that act like that function like that. You are correct.
I thought it was in the AG opinion.
It's absolutely a separate. It's absolutely a separate municipality. That's the big change here. Not the fact that I understand we had county employees through all these other agreements. County was a party to those organizations. We're no longer a party. We're not a party to the EMA. The EMA is a standalone municipality, separate and independent of the county.
But I think there's an assumption being made that somehow EMA is the governing body of the dispatch center. They are the funding body, but not the governing body.
Well, the center board, the
But-
consolidated center board is the governing body who sets the operations. If that's what Carl and Mary said, the board of supervisors is the governing authority over the sheriff with authority to budget. Dispatch brings in with this oversight. Quite honestly, when you consolidate it, I think it should have probably been split up at that point. But the board of supervisors is not the sole governing body over dispatch. Hasn't been historically.
Can we make sure that, because there may be legal implications after this, can we make sure that if your staff wants to say something that is stated into the mic so everyone can hear that? You know,
Certainly.
just so
Yes.
everyone can hear what was stated, please.
Certainly. Was everyone able to hear the comments, or would you like those repeated? Those online and Zoom?
I can hear Amanda just fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I skipped over one slide here, and really, it's the slide that, how do I back up? It's the slide that you already have. It's the 5-year plan. All I did is I pulled year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5 out of the 5-year plan that shows you the bodies, the positions, and how those would be hired, in what order they would be hired. And again, I started to allude to why those make sense, from a workload leveling to you start hiring dispatchers, then you start backfilling the dispatchers into the workforce, then you start hiring your supervisors out of the workforce. But in the meantime, you're still constructing, you're still doing the things to place them into that supervisory role, giving office space, doing the other things that need to be happening as well. So you can kind of see what that is.
Thank you.
Part of why the pragmatics of this matter is it takes about 6 months from date of hire. Is that accurate? 6 months? From date of hire to actually have a viable, usable body in dispatch. They have to have so many hours on each position. They have to go through certain trainings, both here and away. And even, quite frankly, to hire a records clerk, the timing on that, there's only so many places that they can go and get NCIC certified to even actually physically do the job that we would hire them to be able to do. So back planning matters, timing matters. So there's been a lot of thought into that 5-year plan to make sure that we are approaching this systematically in such a way that we can address the Delta work issues in such a way that we can do this with the least amount of budgetary burdening over a significant amount of time. Again, I think this 5-year plan makes good sense to get us to a point of sustainability, but not so much that it gets to the point where we're overburdening the taxpayers to the point where they're taxed out of their minds for a function that right now, as you say, we're answering 911 calls. But we're functioning a medium-sized dispatch center as though it is a small dispatch center, and we're putting people at risk by doing it. And thank God at this point, something bad hasn't happened. And even that's a bit of a misnomer, because bad stuff has happened.
Well, that's unfortunate.
My last bullet on this page, I think, is probably the most important. As I heard all of the issues that county staff brought up, and again, I'm county staff too, and Dan will tell you that when he was the police chief, I was against a countywide levy. The challenge for me and the change for me is fairness, equitability, and long-term sustainability. When the Delta Works study was asked for, I was adamantly against that as well. And one of the biggest reasons I was against it is because I kind of in the back of my mind knew what they were going to say. And I think Judy did too. But the fact of the matter is this. When you separate out the issues with the 2080 agreement, which we can all agree is probably not the best written, it's not something that is some magical document that holds our feet to the fire that can't be altered, changed, and rewritten tomorrow. And I'll use the example, I already talked about maintenance. We entered into a maintenance agreement, and 10 months later, we updated the 2080 agreement to indicate, oh, by the way, we're paying for maintenance. So none of the issues that have been brought up thus far are insurmountable.
Well, I think we all agree on that. I mean, I won't be the only one to speak to that, but I think we all agree on that. No one has been, as I've said to you all, no one has been anti-levy
Right.
here
And
at all.
none of
It's
the
how to make this
issues
work.
Impact the funding request, the funding need for stability. None of them.
None of our concerns or questions do address the funding part. That's what you're saying?
There's nothing that prevents us from moving forward and funding on a stabilized platform that can't be addressed, that can't be altered, that can't be moved forward, that can't be worked out, that can't continue to be, again, partnership and move forward cooperatively down the road. There's verbiage in this slide that talks about the board didn't like not being included, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but we had representatives on EMA, we had representatives on Consolidated Communications Board, and I guess none of us realized that it was hand-holding time and that it was time to make sure that everybody was engaged and carrying information back, and you know, all of those kinds of concerns were spelled out. But I can tell you this: not a single chief of police or not a single mayor has presented the same concerns. So some of the missteps I don't know that the Consolidated Communications Board or the Emergency Management Board owns.
Well, I'm not talking about missteps, Tony. Let's make some corrections here then. I said early on, this is a partnership. That's what
Absolutely.
shared agreements are. I mean,
And that's
those
what I'm trying to
28
do. I'm
Ds
trying to
You're
educate you
reaching
as a
out now.
partner.
Well, educate me all you want as a partner, but I said the part where you work together is not how you get up and you criticize people for not attending meetings or not all of us were involved in something. It's like, this is what we need to be talking about. Let's get together and meet. Those meetings never occurred. I can mention other meetings that never occurred that would have been helpful. I remember back in our EMA meetings, we talked about how this was progressing. I remember specifically saying in one of those meetings, you talked about soon we'd be having the Delta Works study. That was like, great, that would be great information. The next step was going to be the Johnson County, which was the model we were looking at then, or you were holding up as the model for us. It was like, we'll have Johnson County come up here, present to you, you can get your questions answered, and that was at the EMA meeting. And I said that would be the excellent opportunity to engage the board so they hear the same questions, we talk the same language, hear what's reported, and that never happened. And I know this is kind of took a fast speed kind of to get probably to the funding mechanism for 24. I get that, but I just thought it's still then missteps. We all did. Like I say, there's enough blame for all of us to go around probably. Some of us should have been more engaged. Maybe I should have carried more information back than just sending minutes and forwarding minutes sometimes too to board members. But it is what it is. But that's not the meetings that we should have been having to say, we've got to pound out an agreement here. Let's make sure we get all the parties together. Who wants to work on it? Or we know it's not going to be a group of 30 people or whatever, but how do we get it done? And that's not happened. So it's like, is it too late to happen? No. I think, that's what I even indicated in board letter. It was like, it's not going to be one work session. We're going to have to sit down, if that's what you want to call it. It's sitting down for multiple sessions. And all of us understanding and what that means and who should be invited or included. So it's not to say we're countering the effort. It was just other things that are coming up as we're learning, even as we get further into it, that, okay, we need to know more about. Those weren't things you knew about either. I mean, you weren't sharing those with us as far as that it has to be a separate entity. And so then we have to start splitting off individuals being county employees or EMA. We didn't understand, I certainly didn't, the bargaining unit, even complications with that, so that's another element of it. It's just that there are a lot of moving parts in it, and those needed to be hammered out, as the mayor has said, so let's sit down and do it. But that's going to take time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And we're all right in the middle of budget session, as all of you are. And so it's like, okay, when does this work? It's not working real well to do it in the middle of budget when we all have timelines to meet with that too. That was all. And I have to be very honest with, I know that I've had different discussions in the November and December meeting. I aired my concerns to the EMA board, I know. And there was still always comments made that if it doesn't work for 24, we still want to continue doing it. Let's just move on to 25. And I thought that's the direction we were going. And so it's not like to stop this effort.
Right.
It's just to say that let's make it happen.
And I'm not saying that we are stopping anything, but I don't want any kind of mistake in anyone's mind. You all asked for a study. That study came back and told you exactly what you probably didn't want to hear. And
what you need to
now
hear.
that you know, something needs to be done.
Same way with
And
our compensation
now that you
study.
know, we know that we've got a challenge in front of us that has to get started sooner than later. And part of my concern as the sheriff is there's a notoriety associated with some of these decisions, with those cans getting kicked down the road. And therein lies the problem. This is serious enough, and the timing is significant enough that allowing those cans to get kicked further down the road just simply cannot take place. Now that we've been put on notice, the liability's on us. The liability's on you. And again, some of those you don't want to ask the question that you don't want the answer to.
I know.
But you ask the question. So now we have the answer. And we, as a consolidated communications board, we as an emergency management board, we know the route, we know the path that we're ready to march. We know the path that provides for sustainability for the dispatch center in the long term. We know clearly that there are opportunities for more interface. We know that there are opportunities to improve the employee standing, to improve the HR situation, to address a lot of those concerns. But again, I think I want to still try and clarify the difference between saying we are going to fund it this way to provide that long-term sustainability for the funding mechanism of this center. Because to be very honest with you, if we don't go down this road, next year, the center won't be able to pay its bills.
Well, I wouldn't say if we don't go down this road, that could be done other ways. I think there were multiple ways.
I think I looked at the EMA board about 3 months ago and said, folks, if we don't look at EMA, and this was right after Delta Works said, we think you better look at the EMA levy. I said, I don't have another basket to put our eggs in. Mm-hmm. I don't have another trick up my sleeve. And we already have heard that cities
don't have it in their budget?
Can't fund the way that they're currently funding. When we talk about equitability, when we talk about spreading that cost across the entire county, it's the part that makes the most sense. It's the part that I didn't like 3 years ago, but it's the part that I have to keep coming back to and say it does make the most sense. The fact that it goes on the county tax roll and not on each individual city, I get. But at the end of the day, it's the most pragmatic. So take a look at the documents that we provided you with the timelines. Take a look at the baseline document from the 1995. Don't think that there's been some sort of sneakiness with the 28E, or don't, because Mike's relatively new and he hasn't had the chance to see previous 28Es. My fear is part of what we're receiving here is that base document that was created back in 1995 was good enough at that time. And since it was good enough back then, it was pencil whipped, or it was just simply accepted from that point forward. And now, when the rubber truly meets the road, we're paying the price for that very document that, again, can be rewritten 3,000 times, can be improved 300%, and should not be seen as a showstopper either. So I think there's a considerable amount of perspective associated with the 28E that doesn't have anything to do with the levy itself. The levy is a mechanism. The 28E is a functional policy piece. And
I was going to say, well, there's obviously various opinions on that, but I was going to say, I don't know, it looked like you had more to say both. I'm not sure.
I would like to comment.
I wanted to let Tony get done first before I commented, but
and I can too. I didn't finish.
Oh, all right.
I think, yeah. There you go.
Thank you. Okay.
Let's talk about the taxing part first, because in reality, each city can also do a separate EMA levy, which could also be, the methodology for that could be changed to property valuation. So what Sheriff Thompson is talking about with regard to the funding can happen under, I think, the existing structure. It can be passed through and allocated to them, and each of them can pay their share the same way as it's always been, which would allow us to work on, as a team, to work on a new 28E agreement, because I think we're maybe missing an important piece in this, that we are creating a different legal entity and we are creating a different taxing methodology, and we're kind of mixing and mashing the two things right now. We're saying funding doesn't have anything to do with the 28E agreement, but I'm going to let the attorney talk about that, but I get confused about that because it seems to me that it does require that.
Well, and my point in that regard is that I heard this distinction, and Tony, maybe we should sit down and talk about this just a little more to make sure I understand it, but funding body versus governing body. The 28E agreement, as I understand it, places consolidated dispatch under the EMA for funding and for governance. That was my understanding. And the reason for that understanding was because it talked about the center board and it talked about approval by the EMA commission for funding. Center board determined the amount of funding. The EMA commission provides that funding. In the other counties, in the other counties we have looked at, they set up boards that allowed their county a more equitable seat at the table in order to help determine what that budget would be. This does not. This gives that power to unelected people. It is that simple. And if we approve the levy at this time and give that power to unelected people, I question how any of this will change in the future. The taxes are going against Blackhawk County residents, whether through a city or whether through the county, one way or the other. And this is not to criticize anything that Sheriff Thompson has said concerning the concerns raised in the Delta Works study. They didn't jump out at me quite so emphatically when I was reading the report, but I also was not there for the presentation given. And this is also not to suggest that there's anything wrong with the way that the commission and or the oversight board are attempting, or the center board are attempting to implement some of what that study had. But my points remain regarding the county being rushed into an agreement that will determine the budgeting for these entities for at least the term of the agreement, but in all likelihood it's going to become very, very difficult to amend. Other counties haven't, at least Scott County, for example, Johnson County, for example, I believe Muscatine County, for example, Lee County, for example, they have not managed their budgeting this way. And I could propose right now a board, a 5-member board that would be closer to that. We've already talked about this. Some of us have. That would be closer to what Scott County does, for example, in its board of directors. With respect to funding the center at this 125% or 150% levy, this does not tell us what the money has been budgeted for. The simple fact that we have switched from 150 to 125 tells you right then and there that taxing degree is not needed for fiscal 24. And in addition to that, the fact that the EMA Commission themselves have said that they are in their meeting, in the most recent meeting I attended, I believe it was it 2 weeks ago, I think?
Last Thursday, I think.
Or last week, yeah.
Seems like
Only
a lot.
last week.
It feels like a
Yeah.
lot.
Feels like it's been a couple of
Seems
weeks.
like it.
They said that they were front-loading this so that they didn't have to increase their levy as soon as they may otherwise need to do so. That tells us that we haven't identified the line items that those levy proceeds are going to. Based on my reading of 331.424, that is not allowed for a supplemental levy. Those are my responses.
Thank you, Mike.
Mike, if you got directive from this board today that we wanted to move forward, this is academic exercise here.
Yep.
But the board decided that they did want to address this issue of the 2080. What's the timeline on it? What's the timeline on frankly crafting 2080 from the board's perspective that we would negotiate with EMA? How long would that take?
Well, first of all, there's a budget deadline for the EMA, and I believe they've submitted something, but I don't know that we've got a certified budget at this point. I believe it runs February 28th. But as far as the 2080,
to address the issues of governance, to address some of the things that you brought up, right?
my advice is that it has to be determined before our budget is approved and before the levy is enacted, which would be as part of our budget.
Sure. I'm saying number of calendar day. How long would it take for us to craft that to at least be a point of
Oh, you mean
negotiation?
craft a 2080? That
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we could have you one crafted fairly soon. The
Okay.
question is all of these other concerns, whether
Sure.
all of you have had enough time to weigh those. But I could have you in large part because somebody else has crafted one, and I'll just come right out and say
Yeah.
that.
Sure, we've seen others.
Not me, and I credit this person greatly with the work that she did. I can have you one fairly soon, probably this week.
Something to look at anyway?
Yeah, just, well, as we're looking at this 2080 and we're saying, maybe some different perspectives on it of whether it needs to happen before or if it can wait. But if we can start that process, if the 2080 is a hurdle, if we craft a draft 2080 from the board's perspective of what we would want to see in order to make this work, it's at least a point of negotiation. Right now, what we're doing is sort of going back and forth on some details, but there's not a point of negotiation, right? We're kind of internally having a conversation. So my thought is, if we said we wanted to see a 5-person board similar to that of Scott County that's got 2 representatives from the Board of Supervisors, we could, whatever else we wanted to put into that language, send that over to EMA, then we can start to have a back and forth versus counter presentations, which is everyone's sort of static position, but it's not getting to a point of a next step.
And I get what you're saying because, and you make a good point because you're trying to make this more collaborative and less adversarial.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. We can have you one quite soon. That isn't the that doesn't address some of the other issues that have come up, but I think you've acknowledged that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's up to the 5 of us to make a determination. If we were able to craft a 2080 that EMA would accept, then we can have a conversation internally about whether we want to move forward on the levy or not. Then we can, if the 2080 isn't an impediment, then what are the impediments? And we can at least start to check stuff off the list, as opposed to looking at a problem and saying this is a problem and not addressing it and not addressing it and not addressing it. And I understand that this it got brought up just from me watching a supervisors meeting, I believe, in August. I believe it was, there was some this level of heated discussion at that point. And so we've always known this was coming. Now, its exact detail is different, but we've known this was coming at some point.
There's been discussion.
But there was going to be a levy conversation,
I
right?
think once we had the meetings, I forwarded the minutes. I think we did some of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
As far as I don't know that I didn't think it got heated. I guess did we have a heated discussion on it? In August? I don't think so.
Yeah. Short comments. There you go. And so it seems to me that we could at least start with the 2080. See if we can come up with a draft that we would feel comfortable with, whether it's in 24, 20, like the board will have to make that determination.
Yes, but some of that is that the 2080 is the easy part, the writing it, the document. It's
Sure.
making things work. It's the working through the HR issues, those type of things.
Yeah, well,
But
let's
it's
at
a
least
place
start
to
with the easy part.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's easy. We just have to grab one of these and start, I think, right? So, no, happy to do that. I just thought, I don't know if it meets for everybody's budget requirements and timelines and that type of thing. So you don't want to see people in positions they don't want to be in with their budgets either. That was kind of part of this.
Sure. Sure. I think, look, I think we sent that message 2 weeks ago,
to,
right?
well-
Like, that was the point of the message, is that we didn't have the answers, that frankly started this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that we're having this conversation, as painful as it might be. And now it goes from conversation to action. We've got to start to do that. And so if it can be at a draft 2080, we can continue to work through some of the other things, see if there's a way to figure out how to, versus that perspective of why not. But I think we can start to figure out how to.
Oh, yeah, I think that is where we want to go. I think that's what some of this
We've
was
already
here
been
today, was to
doing.
say, this is where we want to go, but this is the time it's going to take to get to some of those places. That's all. Yeah, no, I think good. Dan, have you got thoughts, comments?
I would like to reach a compromise. I've supported the EMA levies since day one.
Yep.
Been involved in these discussions for years. And I just don't want to see it come to a screeching halt.
Oh, sitting on our hands kind of thing.
Sitting on our hands.
You don't want to see that. We got to keep moving forward. I agree. Chris or Tom, do you have any comments or you'd like to make or questions?
Yeah, no, I do think moving forward with the draft 28E agreement coming from us is a good way to keep this more productive and keep it moving forward. A couple still kind of taxing questions that I'm thinking through is so we do know from Tim that this can be reported out as a separate levy, and I do think that's an important part, even if it's going to require more work to be done. But Michelle, for other purposes, for different state laws, is this still calculated into the county's overall levy that would be subject to things like supermajorities and other things that the state legislature may do?
Yes, when this was being talked about some years ago, it was presented to us that it would not be on the county's budget, and therefore the supervisors wouldn't have to vote. It wouldn't appear that way. It just goes on the county tax bill, similar to the assessor. But it has since been determined and relayed to us, and if you pull up a Johnson County budget, for example, you will see that it is included in the county's tax certification on the filings we make to the state. And as I understand it, it is a supplemental levy that is subject to the maximum levy hearing, which requires a supermajority of the supervisors to approve if your collections are going to increase by more than 2%. Certainly, the dispatch budget alone would exceed that limit. And there's a lot of sticky legal questions. For example, if for some reason you don't get that supermajority, I don't know what happens, but the law is very confusing, because does that mean that dispatch gets funded and county operations don't? I simply don't know the answer to that today. But it definitely is subject to all that.
Who would we check?
We
on
would,
those
I think
things?
we could start with the Department of Management at the state level and visit with them about it. And I do want to say, from the staff's perspective, I think that now that an actual agreement draft was presented to your staff, there's been a significant time put in by the Human Resources Department and the Attorney Department, more so even than myself, about what it would take to make this work. And so I don't want anyone to think that we are just sitting on our hands. We are doing that while we're trying to do a lot of other big projects that are going on right now. We are working on our budget. We have had consultants here about a compensation study. There is a lot going on right now for your county staff.
Yeah.
Definitely. Appreciate all that you've been doing too. Yes, so thank you. Well, I guess are we kind of concluding this part of our meeting at least? I know they want to meet, the EMC is going to be meet following, I think. I'm not sure if you wanted a break or anything between or whatever, just go into, okay. But I thought, yeah, it's unfortunate. So we need a minute to change over tapes, I think, as far as that, so.
Do we want to go
How long
ahead?
do you think? Well, I'm sorry?
Do you need to close out of this one?
We can, yes, we will, but I just meant as far as, are you all right to switch tapes then after we close off then? Okay.
Do we want to schedule a follow-up meeting at this point?
Yes.
I agree.
For at least to have a 2080 agreement and possibly maybe some questions answered on.
Yep.
Super.
Yep.
Let's. January 26th. I don't know, do you know, you have your calendar or do we need?
I'm pulling mine up now.
I'll make it work, even if I have to Zoom from Florida.
Oh.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do we think? I don't know. How much enough time? A week? Like meet next, well, do we have budget sessions on Tuesday? Do we have some other, will we be done on Thursday? And I know that's hard to say. I'm just trying to think of like timing.
If you desire to have me here,
Yes.
I would, I'd really rather avoid a Wednesday, Thursday. I have an all-day trial on Friday before the Property Assessment Appeal Board that's actually going to take some preparation.
Next week?
Yeah, next week on Friday. Yep.
Okay. You got any dates to throw out? We're kind of like, yeah, that starts to take, your Thursday, you're out. Okay. Well, could we, yeah, I was going to say, is it information that we need a meeting maybe to get things out? We could do that as far as get things distributed if that works and not have the meeting and then set it after we get the information. I'm just trying to throw out things that we get the information out in people's hands.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. That's the week after, and I have it on Thursday, the 9th. I'm sorry, next week I can do it.
So okay, all right, super. So do we want to do another afternoon? Try it? Afternoon, okay.
You still on vacation then? I mean, the work trip?
Yeah, he's in Florida. Yeah, he's in Florida, so yeah, okay. Well, you said you could Zoom though. You'd be happy to Zoom in, so all right. So to be determined, I think we'll go for 2 o'clock. And if anything changes or we hear from anybody that doesn't work, does that work? Okay, we'll set that time then for 2 o'clock on the 2nd.
Okay.
Okay, great. Just a minute. Did you ready then to switch over? All right, just a second. I'll go ahead. I was going to say, is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you all.
All right, we're going to go ahead and call the Emergency Management Commission meeting to order. This is a special